It was a calm weekday morning in a quiet neighborhood where most days felt exactly the same. Rows of clean houses stood side by side, lawns trimmed evenly, cars parked neatly in driveways. People here liked rules. They trusted signs, uniforms, and authority without asking many questions. That was how the neighborhood had always been. The woman woke up early that day. She moved slowly through the house, careful not to make noise. Her husband had returned late the night before from a long trip, and he was finally getting some rest. He slept deeply, the kind of sleep that only comes when a person has spent years learning how to stay alert even while resting. His body knew how to shut down when it was safe. She made coffee, fed the dog, and opened the curtains to let the morning light in. Everything looked normal, too normal. The street was quiet, almost empty. A few neighbors were already gone for work. Others were inside their homes, starting their day in silence. She stepped outside to take the trash bins back from the curb. The air was cool. She enjoyed moments like this, simple, peaceful, predictable. She'd never imagined that within minutes, that calm would be gone. As she rolled the bins toward the side of the house, a dark SUV slowed down near her driveway. It didn't look like a police vehicle, but it also didn't look completely ordinary. The windows were tinted. The vehicle stopped abruptly, its tires crunching against gravel. Two men stepped out. They wore dark uniforms. Not quite police uniforms, but close enough to confuse anyone at first glance. Badges were clipped to their chests, but they looked cheap, almost plastic. One of the men wore sunglasses even though the sun wasn't bright. The other held a small notepad like he was ready to write something down. "Ma'am." One of them called out, his voice sharp. "We need to talk to you." She froze for a second. Her heart beat a little faster, but she stayed calm. Living under an HOA meant random inspections, complaints, and warnings were common. Still, something about their tone felt off. "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "You're in violation of HOA rules," the man said. "Multiple violations." She looked around, confused. "What violations?" The man stepped closer, too close. Trash bins left out too long. Unauthorized vehicle parking. Landscaping issues. She frowned. None of that was true. The bins had been out for less than an hour. Her driveway was empty. The yard was well kept. Her husband was strict about that. He liked things orderly. "I don't think that's correct," she said. "Can you show me your identification?" The second man laughed quietly. "You don't need to question us. We're HOA enforcement." She felt a small chill. Real enforcement officers usually explained things clearly. They didn't mock homeowners. "I'd still like to see proper ID," she said. The first man's face hardened. "You're being uncooperative." That word hit her wrong. It's uncooperative. It sounded like something police officers said. Not HOA workers. "I'm just asking a simple question," she replied. The men exchanged a look. Then the first one spoke again. "Step away from the bins and come over here." "No," she said, firmly. That was the moment everything shifted. The man took another step toward her. "Ma'am, you are refusing a lawful order." Her heart began to pound. Lawful order? That made no sense. HOA members didn't give lawful orders like that. "I want you to leave my property," she said. Instead of leaving, the second man moved behind her slightly, cutting off her path back to the house. She noticed it immediately. Her body reacted before her mind fully caught up. Fear crept in, slow and cold. "Why are you standing there?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "For safety," the man said. "For whose safety?" She asked. He didn't answer. She glanced toward her house. Her phone was inside. Her husband was asleep. She felt suddenly alone. "I'm calling the police," she said. The first man scoffed. "Go ahead. We'll tell them you resisted." That sentence sent a sharp warning through her. Resisted what? She hadn't done anything. She took a step back. The man reached out and grabbed her arm. It wasn't a hard grip, but it was firm, unwanted, illegal. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice shaking now. "You're being detained," he replied. Her fear turned into disbelief. You cannot detain me. He tightened his grip slightly. You're making this worse. She pulled her arm back with all her strength. Let go of me. Across the street, a neighbor peeked through a window, then quickly looked away. No one came out. No one said a word. Her heart raced. She realized these men were not just pretending to have authority. They believed no one would stop them. She raised her voice. My husband is a veteran. He's inside. The second man laughed. That's supposed to scare us? She felt anger rise through the fear. He's a Navy SEAL. The laughter stopped. For a brief moment, she saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. But it didn't last. Doesn't matter, the first man said. Rules are rules. Rules. That was their excuse. She tried to move past them toward the door. The second man stepped in front of her again. Stay where you are. At that point, her survival instincts kicked in fully. She twisted her body, slipped past his arm, and ran toward the house. The first man shouted behind her, but she didn't stop. She burst through the front door, slammed it shut, and locked it. Her hands shook as she leaned against the door, breathing hard. Wake up, she whispered urgently as she ran toward the bedroom. Wake up now. Her husband opened his eyes instantly. Fullyalert.com. Focused, what's wrong? He asked. There are men outside, she said, her voice breaking. They say they're HOA cops. They grabbed me. He was already out of bed. She had never seen him move in panic. Even now, he didn't rush. He moved with purpose. He looked out the window carefully, observing, not reacting. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Outside, the two men stood near the SUV, talking loudly, acting like they owned the place. The calm neighborhood had no idea what kind of day it was about to become. This was only the beginning. The house felt different the moment the door closed. The familiar walls that once meant comfort now felt like a thin shield between safety and danger. The woman leaned against the door, trying to steady her breathing. Her hands were still shaking. Her husband stood a few steps away, quiet and focused, listening more than speaking. Tell me everything, he said calmly, she explained in short, broken sentences. Two men. Fake uniforms. Threats. One of them grabbed her arm. As she spoke, his jaw tightened, not with anger, but with control. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He absorbed every word. He moved toward the window and carefully pulled the curtain aside just enough to see outside. The two men were still there. One leaned against the SUV, pretending to write something on his notepad. The other paced back and forth, clearly annoyed that she had gone inside. They're not leaving, she whispered. No, he replied. They want a reaction. Stepped away from the window and grabbed his phone. Instead of dialing right away, he paused. He took a breath. He looked at her. Are you hurt? She shook her head. Just scared. He nodded. That's understandable. Those simple words helped more than she expected. He wasn't minimizing what happened. He wasn't telling her to calm down. He was acknowledging it. He told her to stay inside, away from the windows, and keep the doors locked. Then he stepped back toward the front door, not to open it, but to listen. Outside. One of the men banged on the door. Ma'am, come back outside, the voice called. You can't hide. The woman flinched. Her husband raised a hand gently, signaling her to stay quiet. You are refusing to comply, the man continued. This will result in further action. Action? The words sounded threatening but empty. Her husband finally spoke, his voice firm and even. Leave the property. The men went quiet for a moment. Then the first one laughed. Who's that? He said loudly, You, the husband? Yes, the reply came calmly. You want to make this worse? It's already worse, he said. You touched my wife. The second man stepped closer to the door. We're HOA enforcement. We can do whatever we need to do. That's not true, the husband said, and you know it. There was another pause. The men hadn't expected resistance. They were used to fear, not confidence. You need to come outside, the first man said. We need to talk face to face. "No," he replied. "You need to leave." The woman stood frozen in the hallway, listening. Her heart was pounding, but hearing her husband's voice, steady and controlled, gave her strength. The second man tried a different tone. "Look, let's not make a big deal out of this. Your wife was uncooperative. We just need to finish our report." "You don't have a report," the husband said. "You don't have authority." The men exchanged looks again. This time, it was clear they were losing control of the situation. One of them raised his voice. "If you don't come out here, we'll escalate." The husband didn't respond right away. He took his phone and dialed a number. He put the call on speaker. "Police department." A calm voice answered. "I'd like to report to individuals impersonating law enforcement and attempting to detain my wife," he said clearly. "They are currently outside my home." The woman felt a wave of relief wash over her. The men outside heard it too. "Hey, you don't need to do that," one of them shouted. "We can handle this ourselves." "It's already being handled," the husband replied. The dispatcher asked questions, addressed description, what happened. He answered each one slowly, carefully, leaving no room for confusion. Outside, the men started pacing. One of them walked back to the SUV and opened the door, then slammed it shut again. They were nervous now. A neighbor across the street finally stepped outside, pretending to check the mailbox, but clearly watching. Another curtain moved down the block. People were starting to notice. The dispatcher said officers were on the way. The husband ended the call and turned to his wife. "They won't try anything now." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "They rely on fear. They don't want witnesses." Outside, one of the men raised his hands toward the house in frustration. "This is ridiculous," he muttered loudly. "We're just doing our job." "No, you're not," the husband said through the door. "And you should leave before it gets worse for you." That was when one of the men made a mistake. He stepped onto the porch and tried the door handle locked. The woman gasped. Her husband's eyes darkened, not with rage, but with clarity. "Step back from the door," he said sharply. The man hesitated, then stepped away, hands raised slightly like he was innocent. "Relax," he said. "We're not breaking in." "Then leave," came the reply. Minutes passed that felt like hours. The neighborhood was no longer silent. People were watching openly now. Phones were coming out. Whispers traveled down the street. Finally, the sound of sirens broke through the tension. The fake officers stiffened. One of them cursed under his breath. A real patrol car pulled up, lights flashing but no siren blaring. Two uniformed officers stepped out. The atmosphere changed instantly. The two men straightened their posture. Suddenly respectful. "Officers," one of them said quickly, "this homeowner has been uncooperative." The real officers didn't respond right away. They looked at the SUV, the uniforms, the badges. "Who are you?" one officer asked. "We're HOA enforcement," the man replied. "Show me your credentials," the officer said. The man hesitated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge. The officer examined it for less than a second before handing it back. "This isn't law enforcement," he said flatly. The second officer turned toward the house. "Sir, can you come outside?" The husband stepped out slowly, keeping his hands visible. His wife stayed just behind the door, watching. He explained everything, calmly, clearly, no exaggeration, no emotion. The officers listened. They looked at the men again. Their tone changed. One of the fake officers started talking fast, trying to explain, trying to shift blame. It didn't work. They were asked to step away from the vehicle. They were questioned separately. Their stories didn't match. A neighbor approached and spoke up, saying they saw one of the men grab the woman's arm. Another neighbor nodded in agreement. The men fell silent. The woman finally stepped outside. The officer asked if she was okay. She nodded, but her eyes filled with tears she didn't even realize were there. The officer told her. She did the right thing, as the men were escorted to the patrol car. One of them looked back at the house with anger and disbelief. His power was gone. His act was over. The patrol car drove away. The street slowly returned to normal. But something had changed. The woman stood beside her husband, holding his arm. She felt safe again, but shaken This wasn't over. Not even close. What started as a normal morning had now become something much bigger, and the truth was only beginning to come out. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not peaceful, heavy, the kind that sits in the chest and makes every small sound feel louder than it should be. The woman sat on the couch, knees pulled close, staring at the wall without really seeing it. Her body was safe, but her mind was still outside on the driveway. Her husband stood near the window, watching the patrol car disappear down the street. He waited until it was completely out of sight before stepping back. Only then did he allow his shoulders to drop slightly. Not much. Just enough to show the tension had been real. "It's over for now," said. She nodded, but the word now echoed in her head. He sat beside her. It's not too close, giving her space but staying present. That was how he always was. Protective, without being controlling. Strong without being loud. "I keep replaying it," she said quietly. Their faces. The way they talked. The way no one helped at first. "That's normal," he replied. "Your mind is trying to make sense of it." "What if I hadn't run inside?" He didn't answer right away. He chose his words carefully. "You did exactly what you needed to do," he said. "You trusted your instincts." She nodded again, but her hands were still shaking. He noticed and gently placed his hand over hers. His touch was steady, warm, grounding. A knock at the door broke the moment. Both of them stiffened. He stood and moved toward the door, checking through the side window first. A uniformed officer stood outside, alone this time, holding a small notebook. He opened the door halfway. "Sir," the officer said, "just need to ask a few more questions." The husband stepped outside and closed the door behind him. He didn't want his wife to hear everything again. The officer asked about the men, the order of events. Whether there had been any previous issues with the HOA, the husband answered calmly, clearly, the same way he had before. No anger, no emotion. Just facts. These guys weren't professionals, the officer said. They were sloppy. That's what saved this from getting worse. The husband nodded. They relied on fear, exactly, the officer said. We've seen this before. Power without accountability. Before leaving, the officer handed him a card. If anything else happens, call directly, day or night. When the door closed again, the woman exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she was holding her breath. Later that afternoon, neighbors began to show up. One at a time at first. A woman from 2 houses down came with a plate of food. An older man across the street apologized for not stepping in sooner. Another neighbor said they had recorded part of the incident on their phone, just in case it was needed. Each conversation chipped away at the silence, but it also brought the reality back into focus. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't a simple HOA issue. This was deliberate. That evening, her husband sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. He wasn't writing angrily. He was documenting times, descriptions, exact words used. He had learned long ago that memory fades, but written facts remain. She watched him from the doorway. "You don't have to do all that right now," she said. "I know," he replied. But later turns into never. She understood that. This was how he processed things. Through structure, through clarity. The next day, the phone started ringing. First, it was the HOA office. A short voicemail. Polite, careful, too careful. They said there had been a misunderstanding. That the individuals involved were volunteers. The situation was being reviewed internally. He deleted the message without responding. Then came another call. This time, from a different number. A man claiming to be part of the HOA board. His tone was friendly, almost nervous. "We just want to smooth things over," the man said. "No need to involve lawyers or make a big deal." The husband's voice stayed calm. "My wife was assaulted." Silence on the other end. "We're looking into it." The man said quickly. "That's not enough," came the reply, after the call ended. The woman felt something shift inside her. Fear was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Resolve. She didn't want this buried. She didn't want excuses. She didn't want another family to go through what she had. A few days later, a detective contacted them. This wasn't routine anymore. Statements were taken again, this time recorded. Evidence was collected. The neighbor's video, security camera footage from down the street. The detective explained that impersonating law enforcement was a serious crime. Using it to intimidate or detain someone made it worse. The woman listened carefully, asking questions. Her voice was steadier now. At night, sleep didn't come easily. She woke at small noises. A car door. A voice outside. Each time, her husband was already awake, already listening. One night, she finally spoke the thought she'd been holding in. "They didn't know who you were," she said softly. He turned toward her. "No, if they had." She didn't finish the sentence. He understood. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about them thinking they could do this to anyone." That was the truth that stayed with her. Days passed, then weeks. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors. HOA meetings were suddenly crowded. Board members resigned quietly. Policies were questioned. People who once stayed silent now spoke loudly. The woman stood taller when she walked outside. She still felt cautious, but she no longer felt small. Her husband watched her one evening as she stood on the porch, looking out at the street. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. And this time, she meant it. But deep down, they both knew the story wasn't finished. Not yet. The truth was moving forward. And once it did, there would be no going back. The investigation changed the feeling of the neighborhood. What once felt quiet and controlled now felt exposed. People who had lived there for years were suddenly asking questions they had never asked before. Rules that were once accepted without thought were now being read closely. Authority was no longer taken at face value. The woman felt this shift every time she stepped outside. Neighbors who once barely waved now stopped to talk. Some apologized again. Some admitted they had seen strange behavior before but didn't want trouble. Others confessed they had been scared of the HOA for years. She listened without judgment. She understood fear better now. The detective stayed in touch. Updates came slowly but steadily. The men who had confronted her were being formally questioned. Their stories were falling apart. They couldn't explain why they used fake-looking badges, why they tried to detain her, or why they claimed powers they didn't have. One afternoon, the detective called with a serious tone. "We confirmed it," he said. "They were not authorized to act the way they did, not even close." The woman closed her eyes and let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. "They did this before," he continued. "Not exactly the same, but similar. Intimidation. Threats. No one pushed back until now." That sentence hit hard. Until now. The HOA board called for an emergency meeting. Notices were slipped under doors. Emails were sent with carefully chosen words. Clarification. Policy review. Community trust. The husband read the message once and handed it to his wife. "They're scared," she said. Double quotes. "Yes," he replied. "Not of us." Of exposure. They attended the meeting together. The room was packed. People stood along the walls. Some held phones openly. Others whispered. The board members sat at the front, stiff and uncomfortable. Gone was the confidence they once had. When the floor was opened for comments, the woman stood up. Her heart raced, but her voice didn't shake. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse wildly. She told the truth. Slowly, clearly. She described the morning. The SUV, the fake authority, the hand on her arm. The fear. The room went silent. Then someone else stood up. Then another stories poured out. Fines that made no sense. Threats over small things. People feeling watched in their own homes. The board tried to regain control, but it was gone. Within days, resignations followed. Quiet at first, then public. Lawyers became involved. The HOA issued formal apologies written by professionals. Careful and cold, the woman read the apology letter, felt nothing. Words were not enough. The men who impersonated authority were charged. No dramatic scenes. No loud arrests. Just consequences. It's finally catching up. The detective told them the case was strong. Evidence, witnesses, patterns. You did the right thing by speaking up, he said. She believed him now. At home, life slowly found a new rhythm. She slept better. She laughed more. The fear didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled her. One evening, she and her husband sat on the porch watching the sun go down. I used to think strength was loud, she said. Now I know it can be quiet, he smiled. Quiet lasts longer. The neighborhood would never be the same. And that was a good thing, because silence had protected the wrong people for too long. And now it was broken. Time did something strange after everything settled. Days moved forward, but the memory stayed close, like a shadow that appeared only in certain light. The woman noticed it most in small moments. When a car slowed near the house, when someone knocked unexpectedly, when a uniform appeared on television. Her body reacted before her mind could remind her that she was safe. Her husband noticed too. He never pushed her to move on. He never told her it was over. Instead, he stayed steady. He checked doors without making a show of it. He listened when she needed to talk and stayed quiet when she didn't. That quiet support mattered more than words. The legal process moved slowly, but it moved. The men who pretended to have authority faced real consequences. Nothing dramatic. No shouting crowds, just court dates, paperwork, and accountability. The kind of ending that doesn't make noise but leaves a mark. The HOA changed completely. New leadership, new rules, clear boundaries. No more intimidation disguised as enforcement. People felt it right away. The neighborhood became lighter, more human. Kids played outside more. Neighbors talked again, not just about rules, but about life. One afternoon, the woman walked down the street alone for the first time since it happened. The sun was warm. The air was calm. She realized she wasn't tense. Her shoulders weren't raised. Her steps were steady. That realization made her stop. She smiled to herself at home. She began doing things she had quietly avoided. Gardening, sitting on the porch, opening the door without hesitation. Each small action felt like taking something back. One evening, she turned to her husband and said, "Thank you for not turning this into anger." He thought about that for a moment. Anger burns fast, he said. Control lasts. She understood now why he had survived what he had survived. Not because of force, but because of discipline, awareness, knowing when to act and when to let the truth speak for itself. Months later, a new family moved into the neighborhood. They didn't know the full story. They just knew the place felt safe, that mattered. The woman never forgot what happened. She didn't want to. It reminded her of her own strength, of the importance of speaking up, of how easily power can be abused when people stay silent. She wasn't afraid. Anymore, she was aware, and that made all the difference. Life didn't become perfect, but it became honest, and that was enough. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about restraint, about standing firm without becoming what you're standing against. And in the end, that quiet strength changed everything. Life did not pause after everything ended. It moved forward quietly, almost carefully, as if it didn't want to disturb the hard-earned calm. The woman noticed how ordinary days slowly returned. Grocery runs felt normal again. Morning walks no longer came with a tight chest. Even the sound of cars passing by stopped triggering that sharp sense of alert. Still, the experience had changed her in ways she didn't fully understand at first. One afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, sunlight falling across the floor. She realized she was thinking differently now. She noticed details she once ignored. She trusted her instincts more. She asked questions instead of assuming answers were already decided by someone else. Her husband watched this change quietly. He never treated her like someone who needed protection all the time. He treated her like someone who had survived something difficult and come out stronger. That respect mattered to her more than comfort. They talked about the future one evening. Not in big dramatic terms, but in simple ones. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. He considered it. "Sometimes, but running isn't always freedom." She nodded. She understood that now. Staying, living fully, and not letting fear decide their choices felt like a better answer. Word of what had happened slowly spread beyond the neighborhood. Not in headlines, but through people, talking to people. Someone knew someone. Someone shared a warning. The story became less about one incident and more about a lesson. Authority without accountability was dangerous. A few weeks later, the woman was invited to speak at a small community safety meeting nearby. She hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't her thing. Reliving the story felt exhausting, but then she thought about how silent she had once been. How silence had allowed things to grow unchecked. She agreed. The room wasn't large. Just ordinary people sitting in folding chairs. She didn't prepare a long speech. She didn't need one. She told her story the same way she always had. Calm, honest, human. People listened. Afterward, a few came up to thank her. One woman said she had ignored similar behavior for years. Another said she finally felt brave enough to question things that didn't feel right. The woman went home that night feeling something she hadn't expected. Purpose, her husband noticed. It immediately. "You did good," he said. She smiled. "I just told the truth." "That's usually enough," he replied. The seasons changed. Leaves fell. New ones grew back. The street looked the same, but it wasn't. People waved more. Conversations lasted longer. The sense of fear that once lived quietly in the background was gone. One evening, as they sat on the porch again, she leaned her head against his shoulder. She said, "That day could have ended very differently." "Yes," he said softly. "But it didn't," she continued, "because I trusted myself. And because you stayed calm." He looked down at her. "You saved yourself first." That stayed with her. She realized the story wasn't really about fake authority or uniforms or power. It was about choice. About what happens when someone decides they won't accept fear as normal. She didn't know who would hear this story in the future. She didn't know how it might help someone else. But she knew this much. Quiet courage mattered. Clear boundaries mattered. And speaking up, even when your voice shakes, could change more than you ever expect. The night grew darker. The neighborhood lights came on one by one. The woman felt at peace, not because nothing bad could ever happen again, but because she knew she could face it if it did. And that made all the difference. The story didn't end with court papers, meetings, or apologies. Those things closed a chapter, but they didn't erase what had happened. What followed was quieter and in many ways more meaningful. It was the long stretch of living afterward. When no one was watching and no outcome was guaranteed, the woman learned that healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. Some days felt completely normal. Other days surprised her. A memory would surface while she was doing something ordinary like folding laundry or watering plants. Her chest would tighten for a moment and then it would pass. Each time it passed a little faster. She stopped being angry at herself for those moments. She accepted them as reminders, not weaknesses. Her husband remained the same steady presence he had always been, but even he changed in subtle ways. He listened more. He spoke less. He didn't assume that calm meant forgetting. He understood that calm was something you practiced. It's not something you reached and kept forever. One weekend, they decided to host a small gathering. Nothing fancy. Just a few neighbors, food on a table, chairs pulled close. It wasn't about celebration. It was about connection. At first, the conversation stayed light. Work, weather, everyday things. But as the evening went on, the talk deepened. Someone mentioned how different the neighborhood felt now. Someone else said they finally slept better at night. Another admitted they had once been too scared to speak up about anything. The woman listened more than she talked. When someone finally asked her how she felt now, she paused. "I feel aware," she said. Not afraid. Just aware. People nodded. They understood what she meant. Later that night, after everyone left and the house was quiet again, she and her husband sat on the floor. Backs against the couch? I never thought this would bring people closer, she said. Pressure shows cracks, he replied. But it also shows strength. She smiled at that. Months passed. The case faded from conversation, but its impact stayed. The HOA meetings became boring again, and that was a good thing. Rules were simple. Enforcement was clear and respectful. No one pretended to be something they weren't. The woman went back to focusing on her own life. But she didn't return to who she was before. She liked who she was now more. She trusted herself. She spoke clearly. She didn't explain herself more than necessary. One afternoon, she noticed a young neighbor arguing with someone who claimed to represent a service company. The tone felt wrong. The words felt familiar. She didn't hesitate. She walked over and stood beside the neighbor, calm and confident. She asked a few simple questions, requested identification, suggested calling the company directly. The person backed off quickly. Later, the neighbor thanked her. I didn't know what to say, the neighbor admitted. You don't need special words, she replied. You just need to slow things down. That moment stayed with her. It wasn't dramatic. No one clapped. But it mattered at home that evening. She told her husband what happened. He nodded, not surprised. That's how it spreads, he said. Not through fear. Through example. She realized then that the experience had given her something unexpected. Not a mission, not a title, but a quiet responsibility. To stay present. To notice when something didn't feel right. To speak when silence felt easier. Life continued. Holidays came and went. Friends visited. New routines formed. The story became something she could tell without her voice changing. One night, as they prepared for bed, she asked a question she hadn't asked before. Do you ever regret not stepping in sooner that day? He thought about it carefully. No, he said, because you handled it first, and that matters. She lay there thinking about that. About how strength wasn't always about stepping forward. Sometimes it was about trusting someone else to do so. The world outside didn't change overnight. People still abused power. Pretended authority still existed. Fear still worked on those who didn't question it, but inside that house, on that street, something had shifted. The woman knew now that safety wasn't just locks and rules. It was awareness, community, the courage to pause and ask questions. She didn't need to tell herself she was brave. She knew she was capable, and that knowledge stayed with her. Steady and quiet as life went on. The story didn't end with a lesson written out neatly. It ended the way real stories do, with people living differently than they did before. And sometimes, that is the strongest ending of all. The changes did not arrive all at once. They came slowly, in ways that were easy to miss if someone wasn't paying attention. The woman noticed them first in herself. She no longer rushed through her days just to get to the next one. She moved with intention now. Every choice felt more deliberate, as if life itself deserved more care than before. Mornings became her favorite time. The quiet felt different than it used to. Not empty. Full. She would sit near the window with a cup of tea and watch the street wake up. Cars passed. People left for work. Dogs were walked. Everything looked ordinary. It didn't feel meaningless anymore. She remembered how powerless she had felt that morning months ago. How authority had been used like a weapon. That memory no longer hurt the same way. It reminded her of how far she had come. Her husband returned to his routine as well. But the experience had left a mark on him too. He was already disciplined, already observant, but now he was softer in ways that mattered. He checked in more. He asked questions he once assumed didn't need asking. One evening, while cooking dinner together, he said something that surprised her. I used to think my job was to step in when things got bad, he said. Now I know sometimes the real job is making sure things don't get bad in the first place. She smiled at that. It felt true. The neighborhood slowly became known for something else. Not rules. Not strict enforcement. but cooperation. When someone had a concern, they talked about it openly. When a mistake happened, it was corrected without threats. The absence of fear created space for trust. One afternoon, a delivery driver accidentally blocked a driveway. Instead of an argument, the homeowner helped guide the truck. Both laughed about it afterward. It was a small thing, but it said everything. The woman began volunteering locally, nothing formal at first, helping organize safety meetings, answering questions, encouraging people to verify authority instead of assuming it. She never told them what to do. She simply shared what she had learned. People listened, not because she was loud, but because she was real. There were moments when doubt returned, nights when she wondered if the peace would last, when old fear whispered that it could all happen again. But now she answered that fear instead of shrinking from it. If it does, she would think, I'll handle it.
Oh.
That confidence didn't make her reckless. It made her prepared. One day she received a letter from someone she didn't know. It was short. The writer explained that they had experienced something similar in a different place. They said her story helped them speak up, helped them stop something before it got worse. She read the letter twice. Then she cried. Not from sadness. From understanding that pain, when handled with honesty, could turn into something useful. Her husband found her later that evening sitting quietly, letter in hand. You okay? He asked yes, she said. Better than okay? She shared the letter with him. He read it carefully and handed it back. That's impact, he said simply. They talked that night about responsibility, about how surviving something didn't make you an expert, but it did give you perspective. And perspective, when shared gently, could change things. The woman didn't seek recognition. She didn't want attention. She wanted consistency, safety, a world where people questioned power instead of fearing it. Months passed again. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Not perfect, but solid. One afternoon, she saw a familiar SUV drive slowly through the neighborhood. For a brief moment, her heart reacted. Then she noticed the markings. A real company. Real identification. The driver waved politely and moved on. She exhaled. Later, she realized something important. Her body had reacted, but her mind hadn't panicked. That was progress. Her husband noticed it too. You're different now, he said one night. So are you, she replied. He nodded. Different doesn't mean damaged. No, she agreed. It means changed. They talked about the future. Not about escaping or avoiding, but about building. Maybe mentoring others. Maybe moving someday, not because of fear, because of choice. The woman thought about how easily things could have gone another way. How silence could have swallowed the truth. How pretending nothing happened might have felt easier. But easier was never better. She knew now that courage wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It didn't need uniforms or badges or titles, courage was asking. Questions, courage was setting. Boundaries, courage was staying calm when someone tried to take control through fear. The story she lived would never be just hers. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt small in the face of false authority, anyone who had ever doubted their own instincts. And as she stood on her porch, one quiet evening, watching the lights come on across the street, she felt something settle deep inside her. Peace. Not the kind that comes from believing nothing bad will happen, but the kind that comes from knowing she can face whatever does, and that was enough. More than enough. It always had been. The story reached a point where nothing dramatic was happening anymore. And that was exactly what made it powerful. There were no sirens, no confrontations, no urgent phone calls. Life was quiet again, but this time the quiet felt earned. It wasn't fragile. It wasn't hiding anything. It was honest. The woman realized that true change often looks boring from the outside. It looks like normal days stacking up one after another. It looks like people doing the right thing without needing to be forced. It looks like fear slowly losing its grip. She thought about how easily things could have gone wrong that first day. How a simple moment could have turned into something much worse if she had doubted herself. That thought didn't scare her anymore. It reminded her why awareness mattered. Her husband continued living his life with the same discipline he always had. But now there was something else in him, too. A sense of closure. He no longer felt like he was standing guard over an open wound. The wound had healed. The scar remained, but scars don't hurt. They teach. One afternoon they took a walk together through the neighborhood. It was something they used to do without thinking, then stopped doing without realizing it. Now they did it again, slowly, without tension. They passed houses where people smiled and waved. Children rode bikes. Someone was washing a car, laughing as water splashed everywhere. These were small things, but they meant everything. "This place feels lighter," she said. "It is," he replied, "because people feel seen now." That sentence stayed with her. Feeling seen mattered. Not being watched, being seen. Over time, the woman noticed that her voice had changed. Not the sound of it, but the way she used it. She no longer filled silence just to make others comfortable. She spoke when it mattered and stayed quiet when it didn't. That balance felt right. She also noticed how often people asked her opinion now. Not because she demanded respect, but because she carried it naturally. She didn't dominate conversations. She didn't lecture. She listened, and when she spoke, people paid attention. One evening, she received a message from someone new in the area. The message was simple. They had heard about what happened months ago. They wanted advice on dealing with a situation that felt wrong. She replied carefully. She didn't tell them what to do. She shared what helped her. Stay calm. Ask questions. Don't let urgency push you into compliance. Trust your instincts. After sending the message, she sat back and reflected on how strange life could be. How pain could turn into guidance. How fear could transform into clarity. Her husband noticed her quiet mood. "Thinking again?" he asked. "Yes," she said with a small smile. "About how stories don't really end. They just move into other people's lives," he nodded. "That's how meaning spreads." They talked late into the night about responsibility, not the heavy kind, but the gentle kind. The kind that comes from understanding something deeply and choosing to act differently because of it. The woman realized she no longer wanted to erase the past. She didn't want to pretend it never happened. She wanted it to remain part of her story because it shaped her in ways she respected. She wasn't the same person she had been before, and she didn't want to be. Days turned into months again. Seasons shifted. The world outside continued its noise, its conflicts, its misuse of power in other places. But inside her world, there was stability. She still paid attention. She still questioned authority when it felt wrong. But she did it without anger, without fear. That balance was her victory. One night, as they prepared for bed, she asked her husband a quiet question. "Do you think people ever really learn?" He thought about it. "Some do," he said. "The ones who choose awareness over comfort." She smiled at that. Before sleep took her, she reflected on the journey. From fear to awareness. From silence to voice. From reaction to intention. This wasn't a story about heroes or villains. It was a story about people. About choices made in ordinary moments. About what happens when someone refuses to ignore that small voice inside that says something isn't right. The woman closed her eyes, feeling calm, not because the world was perfect, but because she was prepared to meet it as she was, and that she knew was the strongest ending any real story could have.